County. I'm also the president of the Nassau County High School Principals Association. And certainly I am absolutely thrilled to see so many of you folks present this evening. As many of you know, we had originally planned for this event at Hofstra University on February 27th at roughly 3:30 as I was hosting my daughter's 14th birthday party at an ice skating rink. I got a message from our liaisons at Hofstra indicating that Hofstra was pulling their co-sponsorship of this program. No, I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying. Which, of course, increased. They still were permitting us to hold the event at Hofstra. Our cost would change dramatically, and we'd need all kinds of fancy certificates of liability, so on and so forth. Essentially forcing us to find a new location. And I will tell you, I am absolutely thrilled that, magically within a handful of days, we found ourselves here at Long Island Post at Taylor Center for the Performing Arts. Thank you to Dee Barbara Gary for hosting us tonight. You'll hear from her in a few moments. The front page article of today's Newsday declared Long Island as potentially the epicenter of the opt-out movement here in New York. So it sounds like you're familiar with the opt-out movement. Yes? Show thumbs up, thumbs down, you're familiar. Okay, wasn't sure. Whether accurate or not, the fact is that thousands of people have taken the time, energy, and effort to speak out against an education agenda that is misguided at best and destructive at worst. Personally, I am not opposed to testing. My 2.5 decades in the field, I've used tests as a teacher, a department chair, I've used tests as a principal. Tests are an essential component of thoughtful curricula design and implementation. They can be a useful metric for educators. I certainly appreciate data for all that it can tell us about teaching and learning. What many of us are opposed to, however, are the tests being given now and the way they are being used. 3.5 years ago, Carol and I wrote a paper that spoke to the use of tests to evaluate teachers and the harmful impact that would have on our schools. And sadly, we proved to be right. That was a paper that was supported by over 1/3 of the principals here in New York State. Research simply does not support the use of tests as an accurate, effective way of evaluating educators. Research does not support the use of tests that are rushed in their development and based on a set of standards newly rolled out. Does it really take 6 days of testing to determine if a 3rd grader is appropriately literate and numerate? I don't think so. Why must these tests remain so secretive? If they are to be truly useful measurements, they should be released each year so that teachers and students can fully understand their story. Sadly, the governor and our education department have turned data into a 4-letter word for many educators in New York State. Data and test scores should never be confused with teaching and learning. Introduction. Over the last several years, she has become a prolific blogger, not only providing research-based counterpoints to the misinformation espoused by the so-called education reformers, but also providing insight into the humanity and power behind teaching and learning. Just recently, her blog hit the 18 million view mark. Diane is also a research professor of education at LIU. She's the author of more than a dozen books, with the last 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. She's the recipient of 10 honorary degrees and the winner of the Daniel Patrick Moynihan Award from the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences for research that serves the common good. She has been honored by the National Association of Secondary School Principals and the National Education Association. a resident of Southold, New York, and a hero to so many of us here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Diane Ravitch.
Association, and I sat next to the president of the group, and I asked him, why do you have so many small districts? Why don't you consolidate? And he answered, each of our communities is very attached to its schools. We value the close connection between our schools and our communities. Case closed, I won't discuss this anymore. Long Island has some of the best schools in New York State. It has some of the best schools in the nation. Long Island has outstanding teachers and principals and superintendents. I was going to call out some of the superintendents, but I know I can't name them all, so I'll name the one who is the superintendent of the district I live in, and I think he's here tonight, David Gamberg of South Oakland. As you all know, Carol Burris and Sean Feeney have done an incredible job. They organized a statewide petition drive against Governor Cuomo's first evaluation plan and collected the signatures of 40% of the principals across New York State. It was Governor Cuomo's plan. This is the plan the governor now says is too easy and it's too weak. It was his plan. He said it was the best in the nation, but that was then. As Carol Burris pointed out in a recent editorial, Long Island has a 4-year graduation rate of 89%. That graduation rate is far higher than New York State's. Without Long Island, New York State would have a graduation rate of 73%. Long Island has higher graduation rates for low-income students, for students with disabilities, and for students of color than the rest of New York State. Long Island can take pride in its schools, its teachers, and its leaders. Your schools succeed not only because of having fine educators, but because they have the support of your parents and communities. Unfortunately, Governor Cuomo thinks that you're hiding a lot of failing teachers. He created the current evaluation system, and now he's very angry that only 1% of teachers statewide were found to be ineffective. Instead of saying, isn't it terrific that we have so many great teachers, he says, we have to find failing teachers. And since Long Island has been the epicenter of resistance to his flawed evaluation policies, he has ordered an investigation of Long Island's teacher ratings. You must be doing something terribly wrong to have those high graduation rates. So what's really going on? First of all, the governor is angry because the state teachers union did not endorse him in his campaign last year. Frankly, having announced that he was the charter school lobbyist for the state, where there are only 3% of the kids are in charter schools, he didn't deserve the endorsement of the teachers union. Consequently, the government wants to terrorize and demoralize every teacher in the state, even if it harms public education and harms students. He has forgotten that he once claimed to be the students' lobbyist. We now know that he is the charter school students' lobbyist. Secondly, the governor has the bizarre idea that if students don't pass the absurdly hard Common Core test, it must be their teacher's fault. And third, he has said that he will withhold funding for the students unless you adopt his plan for evaluating teachers. Basically, he's holding the children hostage to force you to comply, and that's wrong. Fourth, the governor knows nothing about teacher evaluation. He knows nothing about the research that shows that his ideas are wrong. So what I want to do tonight is talk about his plan and why you must resist it as best you can. When New York State won $700 million in Race to the Top funding, the state agreed to base 20% of every teacher's evaluation on test scores. This, by the way, was Secretary of Education Arne Duncan's big idea. No other nation evaluates teachers by the test scores of their students. Cuomo now wants to increase the weight of student test scores to 50%. This is what a number of the very far right-wing governors have done. It's wrong. He also wants 35% of teacher evaluation to be based on the judgment of the independent evaluators who come in and do a drive-by visit. See you once, and their evaluation counts for 35%, whereas your own principal's evaluation counts for only 15%. The person who sees you on a regular basis, his or her judgment is worth 15%. The independent evaluator who doesn't know your work, their judgment is worth 35%. This is ridiculous, in addition to being a massive waste of money. In the first place, it's a huge mistake to agree to include student test scores in teacher evaluation because only about 30% of teachers teach tested subjects. What should the percentage be? In my view, it should be 0. Are those in grades 3 through 8, where children are tested in reading and math. There is no way to use test scores to evaluate the teachers of the arts or physical education or science or other subjects taught in elementary school. There is no way to evaluate teachers of kindergarten through 2nd grade or of high school teachers because they do not have annual test scores. So how could the state carry out its promise? Well, it might spend hundreds of millions of dollars to develop 50 or more tests so that it could test every single subject in every single grade. Can you imagine the Latin test at the beginning and the end of the year? That actually would be a good subject to teach because your evaluator doesn't know Latin. The state might demand that 1 or 2 months of every school year be devoted entirely to testing and not to instruction. Or it might do what many other states have done, and that is to evaluate teachers based on the scores of students they never taught. There's actually a name for that. It's called shared attribution. Thus, the art teacher would be evaluated by the school's reading scores. The physical education teacher might be evaluated by the math scores. This is loony. There is another reason, though, why it's absurd to judge teachers by the test scores of their students. It doesn't work even when they teach the tested subjects. Students are not randomly assigned. A teacher may have a dream class one year and a difficult class the next year. She may get a high rating the first year and a low rating the next year, and she's the same person. He may get a high rating in teaching reading, he may get a low rating in teaching math, all in the same year, making him eligible both for a bonus and for getting fired, all at the same time. Now, since Secretary Duncan dangled nearly $5 billion before the states in 2009 and persuaded most of them to judge teachers by test scores, this approach has worked nowhere. Houston fired its teacher of the year. The scores are unstable. Those who teach students with disabilities, those who teach English language learners get low ratings. They don't see the big score gains. Those who teach gifted students do not see big score increases. because their students are already at the top of the score scale and they get low ratings. In effect, teachers are being rated based on not on their quality as teachers, but on which students they teach. The experts say that it's wrong to judge teachers by test scores. The American Statistical Association warned against using this method, which is called value-added measurement, or VAM. The American Statistical Association said that teachers account for about 1 to 14% of the variance in test scores. Many other factors, especially family income and home life, are far more important. This is not to say that teachers are unfair. The National Academy of Education and the American Educational Research Association issued a joint statement opposing the use of VAM, value-added measurement, for evaluating individual teachers. Like the American Statistical Association, they said there are many other factors that influence test scores, including student health, student motivation, family support, peer culture, the work of other teachers in the school curriculum, school leadership, and on with lots of other things that actually affect test scores. There are, believe it or not, students who don't do their reading. There actually are students who don't do their homework and who don't care about school, and their teacher will be called ineffective and punished, and this is wrong. States and districts across the nation have now spent hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even billions of dollars, trying to create test-based evaluation systems, and it doesn't work. It misidentifies teachers as good or bad, and it puts far too much emphasis on standardized testing. Between George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind and Barack Obama's Race to the Top, standardized tests have become far too important. They have become the focus of schooling. Our nation is wasting literally billions of dollars on testing. The tests are used to label children as failing, or as a 1, 2, 3, or 4. They determine whether teachers are supposedly effective or ineffective. They determine whether schools will be closed and turned into privately managed charter schools. Our public school students are over-tested. The high-performing nations of the world test students only 3 times in the course of their 12 years of schooling. And in Finland, there is no standardized testing until the end of schooling. The switch to the Common Core standards in testing have ratcheted up the pressure on teachers and principals. Why did New York adopt the Common Core standards? Because the Obama administration required states to adopt these standards even though they were not yet finished, in order to be eligible to compete for the $5 billion that Arne Duncan awarded in the Race to the Top. Many states adopted them sight unseen. They were never field tested. We don't know whether they will widen the achievement gap, narrow the achievement gap, whether they will be effective or ineffective. They have not been reviewed. They have not been field tested. More than 500 experts in early childhood education wrote a letter saying that the Common Core standards are developmentally inappropriate for young children. They require that all children learn to read before they leave kindergarten. But children develop differently, and there's a wide spectrum of normal development. It doesn't matter if a child learns to read before kindergarten, during kindergarten, or in first grade, or even in second grade. It's all normal. The standards recommend a strategy called close reading, which means reading the text without any context. So, for example, reading the Gettysburg Address while knowing nothing whatever about the Civil War or about who Abraham Lincoln was. Or reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham City jail without knowing anything about Dr. King or the Civil Rights Movement. I call this nonsense. The tests of the Common Core are even more problematic than the standards. Arne Duncan awarded $360 million to 2 different groups to develop tests for the standards. One is called PARC, the Partnership for Readiness for Colleges and Careers. some people actually say that backwards. The other is called the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. Pearson has the contract to develop PARC. New York is part of the PARC group, although it's unclear whether New York is using PARC or just using Pearson. It's hard to tell the difference, frankly. So for the past 2 years, New York has used its own Pearson Common Core test, and the test results have been, as you know, abysmal. Only 30% of students across the state reach proficiency, and 70% allegedly fail. Only 3% of English language learners, only 5% of students with disabilities, less than 20% of Black and Hispanic students reach proficient on the New York State test. Teachers said that the tests were, in most instances, 2 grade levels above the student's actual grade. 5th graders were taking tests written for 7th graders. 6th graders were taking tests appropriate for 8th graders. In some cases, the reading levels were even higher. State Commissioner John King, at that time, predicted, former State Commissioner John King, picked up a pencil or gone to a computer, he predicted well in advance that 70% of the students in the state would fail the test. How did he know? He knew because he set the cut score. He set the passing mark. He fixed it knowing that 70% would fail. That's why his prediction was right on target. Russ Walsh, a literacy expert, subjected the PARC test to readability test and concluded that all but one of the most frequently used measures of readability showed that the tests were at least 2 grade levels higher than they should be. Another math expert, Steve Rasmussen of Key Curriculum Press, did the same for the math exams and said that they were at least 2 grade levels above the understanding of the students. He said the math tests were so fatally flawed that they should not be used. Now, why do so many children fail the Common Core test? Both testing consortia decided that they would adopt the same scoring as the federal test called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. I was on the NAEP governing board for 7 years, and I know how the scoring works. The highest level, which is advanced, is in the eyes of people who work at NAEP, like an A++. It's reached by only 5 to 10% of all students. The next highest level is called proficient. That means solid academic achievement. I considered it to be an A or an A-. Below that was basic, which would be akin to a B or C. And really poor achievement is below basic. The 2 consortia decided that they would use NAEP proficient, an A or an A-, as the definition of proficient. Anyone who did not reach proficient was a failure. Now, that's totally unrealistic. If you gave a test and 70% of your students failed, people would question you as to why you had written such a bad test. Or maybe you just hadn't taught the material. Now, understand that Massachusetts that has ever had as many as 50% of its students score proficient on NAEP. The test groups knowingly chose a passing mark that was out of reach of the majority of students. They knew well in advance that only 30 to 35% of students in most states have ever scored proficient by NAEP standards. The Common Core tests are designed to fail the majority of students, and that is exactly what happened in New York State. But you need to understand that the passing marks, the cut scores, are not based on science. They are not based on objective measures. They are based on subjective judgments. The difference between basic and proficient is not determined by a thermometer or a barometer or a yardstick. It's arbitrary. The cut score can be shifted up, it can be shifted down, depending on what result those in charge want. If they want a large percentage of students to pass, they will lower the cut score. If they want a higher percentage to fail, they will raise the cut score, and parents are none the wiser of the game that's being played. State officials will tell you that the scores will get better over time. Well, maybe they will and maybe they won't. NAEP has been using its achievement level since 1992, and a majority of students still have not reached NAEP proficient, and a bare majority in Massachusetts only. Do you think students will be encouraged to try harder if they fail the state test year after year? Do you think they'll be encouraged to try harder if they are called failures in 3rd grade? I don't. If these tests are used for promotion and graduation, most students will never graduate high school. What will we do with them? We are in the midst of a vast social experiment on the children of the nation, and it is all tied to the standardized test. I say this is madness. The standardized tests are not that good an instrument. They are imprecise. Sometimes they're wrong. When I was on the governing board of the Federal Testing Service, I saw test questions that had 2 right answers. I saw test questions that had no right answer. I saw test questions that were ambiguously worded. There is a good reason that the testing companies want to keep the questions secret even after the exam. They don't want parents and teachers to discover how many questions were nonsensical and how many answers were actually wrong. Do you know who scores the answers that are not multiple choice? Do you know who scores the constructed response test question? The big testing companies hire anyone with a bachelor's degree from Craigslist to work for $11 an hour, scoring responses as rapidly as possible. These are temps who will determine the fate of the child and the child's teacher. Putting so much weight on a standardized test has predictable results. It narrows the curriculum only to what is tested. In schools across the country, the arts have been cut back or eliminated. Time for recess and physical education has been cut. Other subjects have suffered as more time and more money goes for test preparation and testing. Tests are a measure, they are not instruction. Tests do not teach, teachers teach. Tests do not raise achievement, tests do not close achievement gaps. If you have a high fever and you take your temperature every 10 minutes, your temperature will not go down, I promise you. If you want to gain or lose weight, it will not help if you weigh yourself more often. Something else has to intervene. The Common Core tests are not like the tests that we all took in school when we were children. In New York and in other states, children are spending anywhere from 8 to 11 hours being tested and even more hours on test prep. I remember taking tests that took 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Why does it suddenly now take 3 to 4 hours to find out if a child can read, if a child can do math? Why should 3rd graders sit for 3 or 4 hours in testing? I mean, 3rd graders are now spending almost as much time being tested as people who take the bar exam. When tests are made the arbiter of the fate of children, teachers, principals, and schools, people do find ways to game the system. Teachers teach to the test. Teaching to the test used to be considered unprofessional, but it's now considered necessary. In some districts like Atlanta and Washington, D.C., educators cheated, erased answers, corrected errors to get those sacred test scores up. There is, of course, a role for testing in education, but it should be solely to diagnose children's strengths and weaknesses so they can get additional help if they need it. Unfortunately, the current Common Core tests have no diagnostic value whatsoever. The tests are given in the spring. The scores are reported in August when the students have a different teacher. The teacher is not allowed to know the questions or the answers, so he or she cannot tell what the student got wrong. The tests are used to grade the student, evaluate the teacher, grade the school. They have no diagnostic value, which means they have no value at all. Imagine if you went to a doctor and said you weren't feeling well, and the doctor gave you a series of tests and said you wouldn't get the results back for another 4 to 6 months. You might be dead by then. But in the end, 4 to 6 months later, all you'll get is a score comparing you to other patients with the same symptoms across the state and across the nation. Why do you care how your scores compare to people in Idaho? How does that help you? You won't get any instructions, though, about what medicine to take or what to do differently. That would be just as useless as the scores on the Common Core test will be. But there's another aspect to the focus on high-stakes testing that should concern you. Testing has now seeped down into kindergarten. There are places where preschoolers are taking standardized tests. Connecticut is now considering legislation to require all kindergartners to learn keyboard skills. It's a little early, don't you think? After all, children in kindergarten must be tested to see if they're ready for first grade, and children in first grade must be tested to see if they're ready for second grade. And if you recall, Arnie Duncan once said that he wanted to look into the eyes of every second grader to know if they're college and career ready. You know, many young children have no keyboard skills, and some of them don't even know how to hold a pencil. And yet we're expecting them to take standardized tests. And then there's this. Children and young people spend 13 years being taught to take multiple choice tests. They are learning, forget the content, they are learning that there's a right answer to every question, and that all questions have 4 possibilities. But life does not consist of right answers. Life requires critical thinking. Life requires the ability to see a problem from different angles, the ability to see beyond the obvious, and the ability to ask better questions, not to find the right answer. Most of life's answers are complex, they're not simple. When we place so much emphasis on the right answer, we penalize children who think differently. We crush individuality and creativity. I recommend to you Yang Zhao's wonderful book, which was published recently, called Who is Afraid of the Big Bad Dragon? Why China has the best and the worst school system in the world. He says it's the best because it gets the highest scores, but it's the worst because its test-driven culture rewards conformity and not creativity. We became the greatest, most creative, most dynamic economy and culture in the world because of our diversity, because there were many different paths to success, and not because of our conformity. Some children do poorly on the test but grow up to become successful artists or musicians or athletes or masters of technology. I recall some years ago, Mrs. Obama said that if she had been judged by her test scores alone, she would never have been admitted to Princeton. Why do reformers want so many children to fail, and why do they want to fire teachers? In my opinion, they want public schools to look bad so they can replace them with privately managed charters. They want to panic parents, so they demand charters and vouchers and send their children to private and religious schools and destroy the very community support that makes your school successful. What should we be doing instead of relying so heavily on standardized tests? In successful schools, of which there are many in Long Island, we should let teachers and principals do their work without interference from the governor or the legislature. Schools that are struggling, the state education department should open pre-kindergarten programs with highly qualified teachers, reduce class sizes, make sure the schools have a rich program in the arts, make sure that the schools have the resources to have psychologists and librarians and guidance counselors and social workers. Where help and extra resources are needed, they should be available. How can we pay for it? How about taking the millions now spent on testing and test-based teacher evaluation? Target the problem and target the resources to solve the problems. Our public schools are a cornerstone of our democracy. They reflect the values of parents and the community. They reflect our aspirations for the future. They are not a political football. Albany should not tell superintendents, principals, and teachers how to do their jobs. They don't know how. The governor is not an educational expert. He has never been a teacher, he has never been a principal, he has never been a researcher or a scholar. He is unqualified to make the proposals that he's making. To parents, to educators, and to community leaders, I say organize, mobilize, defend your children and your schools against political attacks. Refuse the test. To send a message to Albany and Washington, D.C. It is the only way that you have to express your opposition to what the governor, the legislature, Arne Duncan, and the Congress are doing to our children. In an ideal world, we would demand that these officials take the test and publish their scores. But since we can't do that, we can at least withhold consent by opting out. Václav Havel, the great Czech resistance leader, wrote about what he called the power of the powerless. That power resides in refusing to collaborate with those who impose harmful policies on us and on our children. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." There comes a time when civil disobedience is the appropriate and the moral response to a government that acts imperiously with disregard for its citizens, and that time is now. We must preserve and protect our public schools against those who would tear them down and privatize them. We must preserve public education for future generations. That is the civil rights issue of our time. Thank you.
introduction as well, but Carol has served as principal of Southside High School in Rockville Center, New York since 2000. In 2010, she was named New York State's Outstanding Educated by SAMES. In 2013, she was named the New York State High School Principal of the Year. She's the co-author of Detracting for Excellence and Equity and Opening the Common Core, How to Bring All Students to College and Career Readiness. She now denies ever writing that Common Core book. Her latest book on the same track, How Schools Can Join the 21st Century Struggle Against Resegregation, was recently published by Beacon Press, and that is her favorite book now. Carol is a frequent contributor to the Washington Post blog, The Answer Sheets. Our next panelist, Dr. Joseph Rella. Few folks know you as well, Joe, huh? Dr. Rella has been a teacher for over 30 years. His current teaching assignment is superintendent of the wonderful Comstock School District. Joe has been an outspoken and courageous leader who puts the needs of students front and center. He defends a student's right to opt out of state tests, which he believes are neither valid nor reliable measures of their learning. He's also very humble to the point where 30 to 40% of that bio was added after his contribution. Our third panelist, you may know her as well, Jeanette Deutermann. Jeanette is the parent of two public school children, ages 8 and 11. After witnessing firsthand the effects that corporate reforms had on her own children, she began advocating for parents to get involved in the fight to end high-stakes testing, to maintain local control of our public schools, and to preserve the love of learning for our children. Jeanette is the founder and administrator of the Facebook organization Long Island Opt-Out, which now has over 18,000 members. She is also a founding member of the New York State Allies for Public Education, a statewide organization of parents, educators, and concerned community members who firmly believe in the power of public education. Our fourth panelist, Beth Dimino. Beth? I really feel superfluous up here. Beth began teaching science in 1996 in the Wyandanch School District. She now teaches science to 8th graders in Comstock, where she is also the president of the Port Jefferson Station Teachers Association. Prior to becoming a teacher, she worked in healthcare. 3 years ago, Beth began expressing her concerns about New York State testing and its effect on public education. Beth was troubled by the fact that her rich curriculum was being reduced dramatically by the enormous amount of test prep. She knew those pressures would get much worse when the state used student test scores to evaluate teachers, a practice that she and many others called junk science. Beth is one of New York's mummies, and as a mother and grandmother, she is appalled by what is happening to students. This year, she announced that she will not participate in giving the state tests to students. Finally, the moderator of our panel discussion is Kevin Glynn. Kevin is a third grade teacher at the Brookhaven Elementary School in the South Country School District. He is the proud father of two amazing boys, ages 3 and 8. Prior to becoming a teacher, Kevin was a hedge fund trader for Morgan Stanley. He left finance to pursue a career in teaching. During his tenure as a teacher, Kevin was recruited by Pearson, McGraw-Hill, New York State Education Department, and Park to create New York State tests. After witnessing the damage being done to his students from tests and the inability of testing corporations to listen, Kevin decided to stop making tests and start fighting them. Kevin is the co-founder of Lace to the Top. Lace to the Top encourages students, parents, and teachers to wear bright green shoelaces, bracelets, and lanyards to let everyone know that students are more than a score. Parents' rights are more than a core, and teachers' evaluations are Cuomo's declaration of war. Kevin, I turn it over to you.
I want to know when you're going to arrest Cuomo. We ask that you keep your responses brief. If not, you're going to get a Common Core test, which we've already determined that you've failed. Except Beth. And if anybody was here at one of John King's last rallies on Long Island, you know why Beth is going to pass. Carol, we're going to start with you. Carol Burris, you run a high school that has won awards for preparing all kids for college and other post-secondary education. Excellence and equity has been your mission. Why do you not support these reforms, especially Common Core testing?
Right. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Before I answer that question, did you see Cuomo's editorial in newspaper? He said that because of the fog of dissent, no one could understand his reforms. I'll tell you, I think it's real clear in this room. So I don't support the reforms because I don't believe they're going to make our students college and career ready. I think it's a house of cards. I think it's going to fall, and it's based on the abuse of testing. You know, Diane talked a little bit about the arbitrary nature of the proficiency scores. Okay? Let's go back to 2009. In 2009, we were told that 77.4% of our 3rd to 8th graders were proficient in ELA, and 86.4% were proficient in math. Then it dropped. Then it dropped again with the Common Core to 31.4%. What's real? We don't know what's real. It's arbitrary. These are very often political judgments at the worst. I don't even know what they are at the best. Because none of it makes sense. It's like taking your 6-year-old to the pediatrician and they weigh him and they measure him and they say he's fine. And then you go back 3 months later and the doctor says, he's underdeveloped. And you say, why? And he says, well, because 6 is now the new 5. You know, it's kind of like 1st grade is now the new kindergarten. It's the same kind of idea. So how do they set these cuts forth? Where do they come from? Well, Diane talked a little bit about the correlation with NAEP, but our commissioner used something else. He used the SAT. What he did was he did a study. He actually didn't do it. He contracted it out. You can find it on the state website. And he tried to find what is the perfect SAT scores that would correlate with the probability 75% of a kid getting a B- or higher in a college entry course in math or in English, or they also went for a 60% probability of a C+ or higher in those subjects, right? Well, what they came up with for the B- in math was a score of 710. Holy Doogie Howser. 5% of all SAT test takers get 710. 5%. Do you really think an introductory course in college algebra in one of our community colleges requires a 710 on the SAT? No, I don't think so. Now, reasonable people at that point in time would have said, this is crazy, and they would have thrown it out. But he didn't. They just hopped over to the C- and they settled for that. and they took the 3 scores and they put them together. And lo and behold, they said college readiness is 1630, and we will use that as our benchmark. Well, guess what percentage of kids across the nation get a 1630 on the SAT? About 32%. That's where all this stuff comes from. And in the bookmarking process, they would say to the people who are going through the test, if you put your bookmark here, you are aligned with college readiness on the SAT. And now what do we have? We have a governor who says, well, only 32% of the kids are proficient. How could we possibly have so many teachers who are effective? It doesn't matter that proficiency isn't real. But that is what we're going to use now as our standard to try to determine exactly how many teachers are doing their job. You know, Diane talked about it before, about how teachers should not be evaluated by test score. It's not only the research community that says that. Other states that were pioneers in that plan are now moving away. Tennessee started out at 50%. They they lowered it to 35%, and now their governor is saying, well, maybe it should be 10%. The New Jersey Assembly, which was only starting at 10% with PAR, is now passed a law saying that it should be 0%. Van is sham, and everybody knows it. If you read the AIR reports that are issued by the State Education Department on growth scores, you will see that 1 out of every 3 teachers with a growth score has that score move at least 1 category. It's happened twice. So that you have teachers like Sherry Letterman, who is actually bringing the state to court on this issue. Move from effective to ineffective in 1 year. Teaching in the same school, the same grade level, and the same curriculum. But most important of all, why we were so passionate when we wrote our principal's letter is because of the unintended consequences on kids when their teachers are evaluated by their scores. I want you to think about it. Let's say the governor gets his way and 2 ineffective growth scores and you're out. What would Sherry Letterman be doing this year? Well, she might be throwing away all of her art and all of her music. Maybe they'd sing the times tables, that's about it. And everything would be preparing for the test. Or she might be looking around that classroom and saying, you know what, I'm not going to get any growth out of that kid. And that kid, most of the time, he doesn't come to school. Let me concentrate on these kids over there and see if I can get my growth score up. Or maybe she'd spend the year thinking about getting another job. And that is the real tragedy of all of this, the effect that it has on our children. We must be courageous. Thank you.
For Rella. The first one is, will you be our New York State Education Department Commissioner? Next question, before we all move to Consulate. Joe, the question for you, what do you feel is the most effective action we can take in the face of the reform agenda that we've been subject to in these last 4+ years?
Well, the first thing, the job's already been filled. The governor has taken the position. Not that I wanted it, but it's not there. In the long tradition of panelists at these events not answering the question that they've been asked, I'm going to continue that. I'll get there, I promise, but I need to talk a little bit to you, with you. First of all, thanks a lot to NYSAFE and the principals organization for inviting me tonight. A thought crossed my mind over the last couple of weeks. The governor seems to have an increased sense of urgency about reform. You feel it. What's the reason? Well, he said it. He only speaks in sound bites, so you have to listen carefully. New York State schools are failing. The fact is, New York State schools are a story of success. Every day, 2.7 million students are educated in the schools of our state. The governor reported that 109,000 of them, or about 4% of the state students, are in schools designated as failing. And that's a true and painful fact, but it's also a true fact that 96% of the students in New York State are not in failing schools. And that number rises to 99% in Suffolk County. Which I can only assume means the number in Nassau has to be 153%. We won't even go there. Although these students are from different areas of the state, they share one thing in common. The governor issued a report called the Report of Failing Schools 2015, and it states in that report that 58% of the state students are economically disadvantaged. 58%. The school districts where these schools are located have, and this is a weighted average, over 75% of their students on free and reduced lunch. Is a child a failure when 3/4 of the district population where he lives is in poverty, and they share a 1,000-square-foot rental home with 3 other families with all the dangers and disruptions associated with that? They do not benefit from having more educated parents or co-students in their homes. They care for siblings before, sometimes during, and after school hours. They participate 100% in free breakfast programs, and some receive 2 meals on a Friday afternoon to ensure that they can eat on Saturday. They are not failures. For many of them, it's an act of tremendous courage to even come to school. But they do come, because what is waiting for them are not simply an ineffective, developing, horrific, miserable teacher or principal, but caring, compassionate, knowledgeable adults who refuse to give up on any child. There are thousands and thousands of victories that occur every day in our struggling schools. The fact that these successes cannot be measured by any test in no way diminishes their significance. And further, the measure of who we are as a people and as a society is how we treat the weakest among us. So the failing schools, clearly this is not an education problem, it's a poverty problem. And the governor's agenda has failed to provide adequate assistance to failing schools. Now, the APPR, there were a bunch of urgent reasons for that too, and depending upon which day you tuned in, there was a reason du jour. A couple of months ago was, how can 99% of teachers be effective and only 30% of our students passing the test? You remember those tests where all the scores are finagled. That's a statistical word. In the editorial yesterday, the reason was, how can 99% of teachers be effective and only 38% of our students be college and career ready? And I looked up the definition, and it came out of a report from Commissioner King in June 2013, and it said college and career ready meant attaining a score of at least a 75 on the English Regents and an 80 on the math Regents. Seems like a pattern here, but two tests decide the fate of teachers, high school graduates, and ultimately the takeover of schools. Remember 3 years failing, and we get turnaround experts, whatever they are. But they will have carte blanche. They will void all contracts. They will remove school boards and superintendents and local control. By this point, if the thought hasn't crossed your mind, it's time. All that we have been subjected to has nothing to do with reform or improvement of public education. The only purpose of the corporate assault on public education is privatization. Now, if you look at everything that's occurred over the last 4 to 5 years through that lens, it makes sense. We have been starved for resources. Billions have been taken away for the gap elimination adjustment. Over the past 4 years, statewide school aid has been reduced by about $7.4 billion. A tax cap was imposed, and then we were buried with additional required programs mandates, without funding, forcing us to cut programs, reduce staff, increase class sizes, continue an incomprehensible testing program, shrouded in mystery and designed without any input from K-12 educators, child development specialists, without any transparency, with any feedback loop, all of this carefully designed to have a massive number of our students fail. Students, children are discouraged. They doubt themselves. They don't like coming to school. They feel like failures and losers. This is a lesson they are learning daily. It is a bad lesson. And our most vulnerable children, our students with special needs, English language learners, and students living in poverty are being hurt and discouraged to a greater extent. Does this sound like an improvement plan? No. It only makes sense if the plan was and is to destroy public education. Therefore, it makes no sense to us at all. So now comes the so what. So what do we do now? Well, first, we all have a role to play, all of us. But we must remember that we are inextricably bound together in this. Administrators must speak out and support our teachers. We must speak out and support our teachers, parents, and students. If we are silent when we ought to speak and are able to speak, we appear, and we do not, we appear to give consent. We do not consent. Now, a couple of things for teachers. Teachers, don't let anyone tell you who you are. A 1 or a 2 or a 12 or effective or all the rest of it. Let me ask you a question. If you received a letter today from the state and it said that effective immediately, they decided that you are now a member of the Inuit people of the Arctic, assuming that you're not, but now you got this letter saying you are. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Would you start dressing in a lot of sealskin clothing? Would you change the cuisine in your home to include lots of caribou and moose? And would you suddenly have 50 or more words in your vocabulary to describe snow? You wouldn't. And in the same way, you are not what's being said about you. The second thing is this: teach what's important. Teach what's important. I said teach, don't cover. We're not in the upholstery business. And to the extent that you can, don't teach anything else. How many here are fourth grade teachers? Raise your hands. Okay, fourth grade. I can confidently say, without fear of contradiction, that each of you will be the best fourth grade teacher your students will ever have. Remember that. Parents, exercise your right to decide what is best for your children. Don't be intimidated or bullied. If someone tells you something that is clearly blown out, like the state requires that your 9-year-old child has to refuse to test herself, ask for the piece of paper with the regulations. Finally, remember, although at times we may feel oppressed, depressed, demoralized, put upon, this is not about us. This is about the children in our care. The barbarians are not only at the gates, they're inside the walls. And we, all of us, are the only thing preventing an entire generation of students being sacrificed to corporate greed.
My questions are for Jeanette Deutermann from the Bellport Teachers Association. I have to ask you a question. How do you get Newsday to write a positive article about a teacher who happens to be in a union? They seem to like you. Jeanette, what is a parent's role in the problems facing public schools, and what can they do to fight back? How can they make their voices be heard?
Can you guess what I'm going to say? As Jonathan Meade said, sometimes the easiest way to solve a problem is to stop participating in the problem. Parents, I urge you, stop participating in the problem. In our house, we use the terms upstander and bystander. An upstander recognizes that something isn't right. An upstander recognizes that our teachers and our schools are being attacked and our children are hurting, and decides to do something about it. An upstander doesn't say, I wish I could change that. An upstander says, we must change that, and I will change that. Upstanders like Dr. Rella say, how many children being hurt are okay? Upstanders like Beth Dimino say, I believe that it is child abuse. I believe that giving these tests to my students makes me culpable in the abuse of children, and I can no longer do that. Upstanders like Sean Feeney and the New York Principals Group say, we want what is best for our students. We believe, however, that an unproven, expensive, and potentially harmful evaluation system is not the path to lasting school improvement. We must not lose sight of what matters the most, the academic, social, and emotional growth of our students. Upstanders like Carol Burris say, I am weary of those who say, you speak, I can't. Stand up and stop being afraid. Kids' lives hang in the balance. Kevin and Anthony, upstanders say, we will win for our children, our schools, our teachers, and our communities. We will win. Students will know they mean more than a score, and parents will know that their rights mean more than the core, and teachers will be allowed to be more than a scripted module. Like Diane, they say opt out. Stop the machine that produces the data that are used to label your children, to fire your teachers, and close your school. Take away the data and insist that teachers deal with the needs of every child. Do not feed the machine built in DC or at Pearson. Be strategic. Do the one thing that only you have the power to do. Deny them the data. Use the power you have. My advice to all of you is be relentless. When you hear parents in your community believing the wrong message, change it. Say the right message over and over again. On social media, through email, over coffee with friends, at school PTA meetings, and Board of Education meetings. Say it over and over until you drown out the wrong message. Put up lawn signs, bumper stickers on your car, refuse shirts on your kids. Email the governor. I like to put them in air quotes. The Board of Regents and our representatives in Congress. Call your legislators until they wince when they hear you're calling again. Be relentless. Those with the wrong message lack conviction. They lack passion, and their message is weak. Ours is strong because we stand for our kids. So change the message and be relentless. Upstanders refuse the New York State assessments. Upstanders encourage others to refuse the New York State assessments, even when it makes them uncomfortable or carries risk to do so. They stand up and they refuse because they understand what is happening to our children in our classrooms is not okay. It's not okay to give a test to special education students, 1, 2, and 3 grade levels above the grade they're learning at, knowing that 95% of them will fail. It's not okay to give a test to students just arriving in this country who are starting to just learn English, a test in English, knowing that 97% of them will fail. It's not okay to give 8- and 9-hour-long tests to our youngest learners. It's not okay to have children with IEPs sit for up to 18 hours of testing. It's not okay to blame a teacher for an underfunded, overcrowded school environment. It's not okay to punish a teacher for taking a job in a school that has a significant population of struggling students because he or she wants to make a difference. It is not okay to use those scores to label the school failing and close their doors. It's not okay that we are losing science and social studies in the lower grades. It's not okay that arts, music, and recess are being squeezed out by testing and test prep. It's not okay that kindergarten students are learning how to bubble in an answer before learning to write their name. It's not okay to have all children taught the same rather than taught as individual learners. It's not okay that kids pull out their hair, pull out their eyelashes, wet themselves and cry while taking these Common Core assessments. And it's not okay for our youngest school children to doubt their self-worth, think they're failures, and lose the love of learning. So will you be an upstander or will you be a bystander? The choice is yours. But make no mistake, thanks to Cuomo's corporate education agenda, every single person in this room, every single person in this community, and in this state will need to make that choice. Change does not happen through compliance. It happens through civil disobedience. It's time for parents to take action. Parents need to understand the power that they have. We can stop this if we recognize this power, stand together, and stand up. It's time to say it's not okay, and it's time to be upstanders.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight and for staying so long. Every single person in this room is a hero because you're here to defend your own particular child, whether you gave birth to that child, you adopted that child, or those children are in your classroom. I would say that thank you very much to the Principals Association and certainly to the people here at the Tillis Center for inviting all of us to come out. If anybody here expected to hear both sides of the story, not tonight. Not tonight. This is really quite a magical room. The last time I was here, I came to see David Copperfield. One of the best magic shows I've ever seen. And certainly the people that I'm sitting here with have created a tremendous amount of magic around New York. Anthony Griffin, part of Lace to the Top, Marla Kilfoyle, New York Bats. There we be, badass people. And of course, the teacher. I'm not 100% sure why during the primary, NYSET didn't come out and endorse this teacher. But I'm proud to announce that as the president of the Port Jefferson Station Teachers Association, we did endorse the teacher. I always come dressed in these clothes to these events. And I want to tell you that it's not out of disrespect. Everyone here is dressed beautifully and professionally. But I really need everyone in this room to understand when Mr. Cuomo writes an op-ed piece for Newsday and talks about the union, this is the face of the union. I'm the president of the Port Jefferson Station Teachers Association, and it is my honor to represent my members. But I know that as long as I keep my eye always on my students, I'm representing my members. Always. First, it's the children. As Dr. Rella would say, the Maasai people say, and how are the children? And if you can't say that every single one is okay, things are not well in your community. Three years ago, I started to understand that I was spending an inordinate amount of time prepping for these tests. I was giving homework, which I don't really believe in, because I feel like if you can do this at home, why do you need me? So we do long projects, large projects, the science fair project, which everybody loves in the 8th grade. Those things have to be completed at home because you're not going to just use all your class time to do that. But mostly I don't give homework, but I was giving pages and pages of homework from the measuring notebook. Measuring notebook, right? Kids were glassy-eyed. Then they'd come in the next day and we'd have to go over the answers. Now, most of the people, I would say 99% of the people in this room took Regents exams in New York State, right? And so you took a bio exam. Well, you learned a year of bio. You studied the Barron's books. You took the bio test. Took a year of chemistry. Studied the Barron's books. Took the chemistry test. Sometimes the test was hard. Sometimes it wasn't as hard. Nevertheless, everybody in the whole state knew what the curriculum was. We had pretty good standards here in New York until Mr. Cuomo became the governor. And then we got a governor that failed the bar exam 4 times, so I guess he's got to write the question. Not that way in 4th and 8th grade. In 4th and 8th grade, you take 4 years of science on one test, right? On the 8th grade science assessment and the 4th grade science assessment, there is, say that 3 times fast, science assessment, physics, chemistry, biology, and earth science on the same test in 4th grade and 8th grade. Not when you're 15, 16, 17, and 18 years old, when you're 8 years old and 12 years old. The tests are ridiculous. The test prep was ridiculous. I am a life science teacher. I had all kinds of animals in my classroom. We did all kinds of labs, and it was all being reduced to every Friday doing test prep. I just couldn't do it anymore. I could not have my students leave my room, and I cannot have my students take this test. Karen McGee, the president of NYSED, said to me, Beth, you can't say what you say. You have to be afraid. And I know that she said that because she was afraid for my job, and I appreciate the fact that she was trying to protect me. But I said, Karen, I don't have a choice. I am afraid. I'm not stupid. I am afraid. But I have to go forward. Because there are many, many parents in the room all the time that say to me, Mrs. Dimino, the teachers won't stand up and tell us what to do. I'm here to tell you that I am a teacher. Refuse to allow your children to take the test. Have an I refuse letter. You need to go to nysape.org, nysape.org, and you need to download that letter and send it to school tomorrow. If 53%, all I want is 53%, 53% is how much Governor Cuomo won by. I want 53% of the parents in this state to refuse to allow their children to take this test. So I can go on Facebook the very next day and say, how's that 53% look at government? There was a flat promo right on the front seat right here, if anybody wants to have their picture taken with them. How's that 53% working for you, Governor? So I went out and I told people, please refuse to allow your children to take this test. Assessments are supposed to do 2 things. Inform pedagogy, which they don't do because I'm not allowed to see the test questions before or after, and inform about the child, how the child is learning in my classroom. Well, it doesn't do that either because the child takes the test in my room in 4th grade, and the grade doesn't come back until they have their new teacher in 5th grade. The test has absolutely no bearing on what happens to the child. AIS testing is not attached to the test. Their placement for next year is not attached to the test, whether they're retained or they're promoted. The testing serves no purpose whatsoever. So I'm going to on the road show with all of my friends, and we're talking about refusing the tests. And finally I went in this year and I said, Joe, I can't give this test. In good conscience, I cannot go out there and tell this to parents without making some sort of a step, taking some sort of step that they could look at and say, okay, she's scared and she did it, so I'm scared, but I'm going to do it. I don't care what your superintendent tells you. I don't care what anybody tells you. In this country, children in this state, children can't go on a field trip without their children's permission. They can't take this test without your permission. If you don't want your child to take the test, refuse the test and send that letter in tomorrow. Yes, 3 is a magical number. I'll leave it alone. Thank you very much for listening to this stage today.
And you're brave in 2 ways. You're brave every day when you go into your classroom and deal with all the emotional, strange, complicated things that the kids bring to your class, and you say, I am going to engage that child and bring them the passion that I have for the world, whether it's science or phys ed or math or English, and I'm going to break down the walls they are bringing and bring them into adulthood. And then you're brave in this other way, where you're standing on the barracks fighting off these grotesque, inhumane tests that are threatening to take over teaching and learning and the love of learning. A lot tonight. I was just saying, I can't follow educators. You know, these brilliant educators are the best public speakers, wonderful storytellers. But I really do believe that public education is the infrastructure of democracy. And we may have some problems with the MTA, but the deeper problems we have are with genuinely funding, supporting, and trusting teachers, because children thrive when teachers are respected and trusted. And democracy and children suffer when teachers are treated like suspects who don't understand anything and must be spied on and judged. So I believe that when they are trying to burn the house down in public education, they are also trying to burn the house down in democracy itself. So I want you to only have to be brave in one way. I want you to only have to be brave with your children and with your community, and not to be out there actually doing the political work. But I am so glad you are, because there is a powerful movement here that is... There's a lot of power here in this room, first of all, that is rising up around the state and around the country, and you guys, and you know this, are on the leading edge of it. You're the lighter fluid. And you are leading the country, and you are taking us 50 words for brave and teaching people how to be brave all around the state and all around the country. And the final analysis, this is not just about education, it's about who we are, about what a person is. The Cuomo theory of testing, I like to put them in air quotes too, but I don't have that privilege. The Cuomo theory of testing is a theory that doesn't make sense of what a person is. And so we are fighting for the soul of democracy and the soul of the humanness of who we are. And I am so proud to be with the most human, loving, creative people I know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have a few moments. I want to respect everybody's time. We have a few moments for some questions. As expected, we must have collected upwards of 30,000 questions. I have tried to condense them and summarize them into 6. So I will begin with a statement because I have, in our organization, the Nassau County High School Principals Association, we have a long-standing relationship with Hofstra and the School of Education, and a statement was passed that the Hofstra School of Education faculty are here, and we had no idea that Hofstra pulled out. We support this movement, and Dr. Sherry Letterman is one of our graduates, and we couldn't be more proud of her. A few years ago, Sherry was on a panel similar to this at Hofstra with us. I have one question that really came up a number of times, and it has several parts. So I'm going to do a close reading, you do a close listening. What can we do to increase the opt-out rate in New York with the concern about students who may not take a test, might not be able to receive AIS services, with also concern about the district reaching this magical 95% participation mandate, and also with concerns about legal recourse for teachers who may refuse to give the test. Does anyone on the panel have thoughts about those points?
Crazy. I don't know about what repercussions there are for districts. My own district, there haven't been any. We had a significant... I don't know if the 95% is still in force. I don't believe it is. But for the last 3 years, we haven't met it. And that was not due to anything except parents making a decision. Believe me, before any conversation started. In terms of AIS, there are multiple measures that are employed before students are recommended for AIS. It's not based on one of anything. Whether it's a teacher test or a state test or no test, and parent input is a whole series of things that we look at. So if you're being told otherwise, ask to see the AIS plan for the district, which we have to file annually, and you'll see all the different things that go into making that decision. And it's not the state test. Teachers who are considering refusing the test need to be careful. I'll tell you that right now. Unless there's a lot of you. Just like superintendents, I need to be careful. I can't tell you to opt out of the test. I can tell you if I had children, they wouldn't be anywhere near the test. I can't do that. But if I'm doing that alone, if I tell you to opt out of the test alone, I'll get my certification lifted. I don't want to do that right now. I got skin in this game. I don't want to leave it. So be careful with it, is what I'll tell you. You have to, you need to be, I think, educating, we need to educate each other, we need to educate our parents. The question I get most often from parents is, what will happen if I do this? Not whether or not they can. I can't give you that permission, it doesn't exist. That's your right as a parent to make that decision. But what will happen to my child if I choose to do this? Will it affect their college entrance? But that's only because there were very crazy things being said, which is usually a sign of a very weak position. You have to make stuff up. There's normal lying, and then there's what is called hideous lying. And that goes way beyond the normal lying. And the first rule of lying is try to lie about things you won't get caught in. I'm not speaking as a liar here, but I kind of... My wife's sitting here, but she knows I don't lie. But seriously, test all these things. When you hear things, you're going to hear a lot of things. We heard last year that it's okay to keep children in the classroom sitting and staring. That's never okay. That's corporal punishment. And if someone tells you, look, here's the bottom line. We all get the government we deserve. We do. Districts get the superintendents and the school boards they deserve. Because you have the power to vote us out if we don't listen to you. Just like with the politicians. We get the government and the schools and the school districts we deserve. So start acting like Americans here, please.
Well, you can certainly friend all of us on Facebook. That's Lace at the Top, Long Island Opt Out. I'm just Beth Dimino. PJSDA.org. Go to nicesafe.org. The questions you haven't even thought of have been answered on that website. These are the same questions that are always asked. So first you can friend everybody. Teachers, every single teacher in this room, you can refuse to allow your children to take the test. Send in your letter tomorrow. Parents, follow your teachers. Follow your teachers. I can't ask everyone to become a conscientious objector. I appreciate that there are ramifications for those actions, but nobody can stop you as a parent from refusing to allow your children to take the test. Leave here, every person leave here with the purpose of converting 5 other people to refuse the test. And then make those people tell 5 more people. Between BATS, Lace to the Top, Long Island Opt Out, there have to be 100,000 members. ST Caucus, PJSD, there have to be 100,000 members. If every single one of those people opt out, we're golden.
Okay. Another question, please. I have heard some administrators say that if we allow parents to opt out or refuse this test, then they will start to refuse every test. What do you say to that, and how can we as educators and administrators make clear the difference between refusing these tests and other tests given in the classroom? Carol?
Yeah, I'd love answering that question because I have been the recipient of 2 classes now where the first one, their sophomores now, 30% of them opted out of the test in Rockville Center. And last year, 50% opted out of the test. And I can tell you as their principal that not one of those students have ever gone to their teacher and said, I'm not going to take that quiz, I'm not going to take that Regents, I'm not going to take that final exam. Kids and parents get the difference between fair tests and valid tests and unfair tests. The way I say it this way, I'm old, so I kind of remember the civil rights movement. And when that happened, when people protested the unfair laws, they didn't go out in the street and then murder people or break into stores. They understood the difference between the laws that were fair and just and the ones that were not. Have faith in parents and have faith in kids. They make the right decisions.
So since we know that U.S. students are behind their international peers in STEM and humanities education, How do we bring our students and requirements up for our children to compete in the global economy? Doesn't some generation need to take the pain for the leap necessary? Both sides, balance. Everyone relax.
I don't even know where to begin. Again, we're talking about measuring through testing. And we're also talking about very different countries that have different populations of students. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of the ones that are on the top of PISA are not the ones that are doing all the testing. And that's really the irony of it. It's like the Common Core where they say, well, you have to have high standards because we're competing with these other nations. Well, there are nations that have very rigorous standards that are on the bottom of PISA, and there are nations with very rigorous standards that are on the top of PISA. All of this really doesn't matter very much at the end of the day. So we've always been in the middle of the pack, right? Even when people think that, wow, schools were wonderful back 20 years ago, we were in the middle of the pack then. We're looking at the wrong measures. Take a look at some of those countries that are doing well. Finland, for example. They're heavily unionized countries. They have equity in their schools. They give every kid great curriculum. They have preschools. Let's start looking at what they do instead of chasing the test horse.
On that note, we're a little past 9:30. I do want to thank all of our panelists, Carol, Joe, Jeanette, Beth, and Kevin. And I also want to thank, once again, Barbara Berry and LIU Coach School of Education for hosting us. And I want to thank you all for being a